Thank you, Gary, for meeting with me. I know it's been a while since we've actually physically spoken. I know that we have some history together, but I'm really grateful that you've been able to come on today. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So Gary, for those of my viewers who won't probably know who you are, some of them do, could you just give us a brief background on yourself, who you are and what you do?
Well, I've been around a long time. This could take some time. I'm basically an epidemiologist, so I work in health, and my role is to discover or find the causes of diseases, mainly chronic diseases. There's two types of epidemiologists. One works in chronic diseases and the other works in infectious diseases. I work more in chronic diseases because I'm not medical. Things such as heart disease and diabetes, arthritis, a whole range of different problems that come up from time to time due to people's lifestyles. And I've done that since 1970, so what's that, about 50 years now.
Wow.
I've been involved in a number of organisations and setting up organisations. In doing that, the latest one being the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine, which I helped set up in 2006. And that's a large group now, which is on the sort of medical register as dealing with lifestyle-related health problems, diseases, such as all the chronic diseases that I was just talking about, because these aren't caused by microbes or germs. These are caused by people's lifestyles and the environment. And so there was nothing before that, before the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine in Australia, specifically to deal with these particular problems. But I guess in getting to that stage, I've been through the mill. I started off in health education, what was then called health education, which was working out how to deliver messages to influence people, to motivate people to change their behaviours. Then that was changed to health promotion. I then got involved in looking at things like quitting smoking and all the issues back in the 70s that were just new to health, because the diseases changed from those days. Back in around about 1980, they changed from being predominantly infectious diseases to predominantly lifestyle-based chronic diseases. And so you needed a totally different type of analysis and type of intervention to deal with that. It's not just as simple as with the medical doctor giving somebody a pill to go away to take away an infectious disease. So this is associated with lifestyle, with behaviour, and of course lifestyles are also influenced by the environment. So the environment can affect not only the chronic diseases but the infectious disease. The big pandemic that we've got going at the moment, COVID, of course, is caused largely by pulling down too many trees and allowing bats and other animals, zoonotic species, to carry viruses close to where people live. And if we continue to do that, we're going to continue to have pandemics. And my role will then be not only to deal with chronic disease, but to deal with infectious diseases as well.
So look, the spread of infectious diseases, we could be here for a few more hours, so to speak. And I'm no expert, and but I will be interested to hear more about that. But getting back to the variables that are present when you talk about people's choices, you talk about backgrounds. I assume that culture plays a big significance in some of the problems that you've probably seen in the past. Am I correct?
Yeah, most certainly. And I've worked a lot in the Pacific Islands, in your home island, of course, in Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, up in Nauru, in the Torres Straits, in
Papua New Guinea.
Sorry?
Did you?
In Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, that's probably enough to talk about, because the culture, of course, does influence everything there. But and also, I left out one of the most significant ones is Aboriginal society in Australia, Aboriginal culture. And of course, those cultures are influenced by the colonisation that has occurred with Europeans coming into those cultures and changing the way that they operate. In your Pacific Islands, for example, there was in the early days of colonisation back in the 1800s in particular, there was a lot of missionaries went into the islands and competed with each other to get people to convert to their religion. And in doing so, they provided meals, huge meals on a Sunday. I've been in Tonga, for example, where we've counted the number of calories that these meals that are provided by current religions there to try and attract the islanders to go to their services on Sunday and to belong to their churches has been about 3 to 4 times as much as the average Australian male eats in a week. That's just on a Sunday. And that's because they kill pigs and they do all sorts of things to attract the group. Now, obviously, that's going to lead to obesity and overweight, and that's going to lead on to the diseases associated with that. And just about all chronic diseases have a link with obesity. And in fact, even infectious diseases like COVID are more dangerous if you're obese, and you will take much longer to survive from COVID, much longer to get better if you are overweight or obese.
Like I'm as I am getting a little bit older, I am trying to get a little bit wiser, and have realized that, you know, there's a lot of factors that are involved in terms of staying healthy, one, and changing the mindset so that it just changing the mindset of what it is that I'm doing to my body. I mean, it's difficult because
the other thing you've got to add to that, Shane, is that if you're living back in the islands, the islanders are bombarded by the offcuts of some of the meat that the New Zealanders don't eat in lamb. In fact, you know, belly fat from a lamb won't sell in New Zealand, so they send it to Tonga and Samoa cheaply, and that's then the more fattening and more dangerous food, because that increases or adds to the genetic predisposition of islanders to have high cholesterol and to have potential heart disease. And so it's the environment it's not the individuals, it's the environment that white people have created that have made it difficult for Tongans, for islanders. And I've done a lot of work in all of the islands trying to get them to change their diet and eat what they used to eat before colonisation, because that was healthy food, and the natural foods of the islands was extremely healthy. And if that was still eaten now, there wouldn't be as much problem as there is. But of course, as a result of getting big through the diets that come from countries like Australia and New Zealand, islanders have developed this passion for big people as well. And that's why you're very good rugby players. They provide very, very good rugby players because they're big guys. And the men like big women too, because they've been encouraged to do that, to support the diets that they've been given. And it's interesting working with the young girls up there in Tonga. While they were going through high school, they were all quite lean and fit because they were doing lots of exercise and they were eating lots of natural foods. But then once they got married, they started to put on weight and didn't seem to mind putting on that weight because the men didn't mind them being big anyway. In fact, preferred them for the reasons I've just talked about. Yeah,
I mean, cultural tendencies, cultural upbringings. It's a hard, what do you say, programming to get out of, and I'm sure, you know, so some white guy coming to the islands telling them to stop eating, and it would have been tough for you at the time.
It was very tough, particularly originally. One of the good things that's happened recently, and good, not necessarily directly good, but because islanders are big and are strong and are very good footballers, they've made their way to Australia and New Zealand and made their way into the top rugby union and rugby league sides. And in Australia now, it's over 50%. In fact, it's close to 60% is made up of islanders who are then able to support their families back home much better because they get very well paid playing professional sport in Australia, and some even in the United States. And that's potentially going to change the culture of those islands to accept more the healthy lifestyle. I spent a lot of time working with a couple of the international Australian rugby players in Tonga. We got them to do ads when I was working for the World Health Organization over there, saying it's good to be big, but it's not good to be fat.
That's
and
right, yeah.
You know, being big means big muscular, which islanders are.
Yeah.
But it's what they do on top of that to add the fat to that that makes them unhealthy. And they're really not good footballers when they get to that level.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we know about a few of those. I mean, I know that we've spoken a lot about you know, my cultural background being Māori and some of my native Tongans and Samoans. But who are you primarily dealing with at the moment?
Well, it varies, but it varies on the problem, and the problem changes all the time in health. So back in the 80s, you know, I was dealing more with fitness, physical fitness with Australians. And then in the early 2000s, I was asked by the World Health Organization to go over to the islands and work over there. I mean, I'm not needed. I work with professional people in New Zealand, with Maoris there, but I'm not needed there because you've got a pretty good setup yourself. And in essence, a lot of the Maori culture and a lot of the support that Maoris get over there is much better than what Aborigines get here. So, you know, I've turned also to working with Aboriginal groups here. And that's a separate issue because you are, even though a lot of people say, you know, Maoris and Aboriginals are similar sorts because they're First Nations people, although Maoris are not First Nations people, as you probably know, in New Zealand, but they should be treated in a similar way. And that's not true. That's not right. You've got the Treaty of Waitangi over there, which has been tremendous for New Zealand Maoris in particular. Australian Aborigines don't have that, and they've got a culture that goes back 60,000 years, whereas the Maori culture in New Zealand just goes back 800 years, and that influences things dramatically.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, talking about the Aboriginal culture and some of the things that when you talk about going back to some of the foods that you know, our people should be eating and should be eating still, you know, reading such books as you know, Dark Emu and whatnot, talking about some of the foods that were available and that the Aboriginal people were eating back then. Like you're saying, it's quite similar in terms of the colonization and what's been lost with the Aboriginal culture. And I mean, there's a resurgence there at the moment, I know, but like you're saying, they don't have as, what do you say, a greater support, I suppose, in terms of not having a treaty. I mean, with the treaty, it took a while and still is, but Aboriginal people, you know, there's a bit of, you know, legwork still to go in terms of.
Yeah, but if you look at, for example, the traditional Aboriginal diet, it was 80% vegetable and 20% or 80% plant and 20% animal, which is about the perfect diet. And most traditional cultures throughout the world, the Swedes, for example, the Norwegians, the Scandinavians, even down to the Mediterraneans, if you take their original diet, it is probably the healthiest diet you can get. It's different in different parts of the world, but it's probably the healthiest diet you can get because it comes from natural whole foods, even including the animals. And there's no, you know, in Australia, of course, with kangaroo and with even lizards and snakes and things, they are extremely, they're high in fat, but they're extremely good fat. So with kangaroo, it's what little fat kangaroo has. When I say they're high in fat, kangaroo is not high in fat, but what little fat it has is polyunsaturated fat, which is really good for the heart. And we, even though it's hard to know what the Aborigines were like before English colonization, there's a pretty fair assumption that they were very healthy. They were lean and healthy because of their diet. Well,
I mean, you know, Bruce Pascoe in his book was talking about that there's evidence for pens And so, you know, kangaroos and emus would have definitely been penned. So, and like you're saying, they're very, very healthy meat to eat. And I imagine,
as Pascoe points out, they've farmed for thousands of years.
Yep.
It just wasn't recognised when the English came in, because the English didn't want these people to be seen as a culture, as having a culture. The big thing, though, and one of the areas that I'm particularly working in at the moment, is not just the physical factors. You can isolate the causes of disease, lifestyle causes of disease. And we have an acronym that we use. We call it nasty odors. And I won't go through every one, but it includes things like nutrition, activity, stress, technology, inadequate sleep, environment, and so on and so on. But the one thing that we didn't have to go with Indigenous cultures, and this is not just Aboriginals, but this is Indigenous cultures around the world, is something that's more psychological, and that's the fact that they've suffered prejudice, they've suffered colonisation, they've also suffered what's called adverse childhood experiences. So early in life, living under deprived conditions, they suffer from physical abuse and sexual abuse, and also from just the conditions that they live in, which then lead on to chronic disease at some later point. So, you know, heart disease happens in Aboriginal men, for example, 20 years earlier than it does in European men, because of these, we call them MAL, and MAL is an acronym for meaninglessness, alienation, and loss of culture and identity. And one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment in some of the Aboriginal communities that I'm working with is restoring this loss of culture. We call it, it's a change back to their original culture. It's cultural healing that's used, not medicines or tablets or even lifestyle so much. It's getting them to recognise and acknowledge and be proud about their culture and stand up for their culture, which then gives them this pride that takes away the meaninglessness, alienation, and loss of culture and identity.
I'm really happy that you are kind of addressing those things, Garry, because it's something that I as a native New Zealand Māori hold dear to my heart, and that is and something that I want to bring in, not for just men of Māori or Aboriginal culture, all men, in fact, is this self-awareness of yourself and how healthy that can be for your body and your mind, you know. So, but yeah, especially
also your awareness of culture.
That's
and
right.
That's important with Māori. That's particularly important because of the system that you have set up over there. We're trying to rediscover it in Aboriginal culture here, and we will, because it's starting to happen. And Pascoe's book and a couple of other of the revisionist history books that have been written now are starting to realise that this is an important part of long-term health of the culture and of the individual.
100%. And I am, have actively been engaged in learning more about the Aboriginal culture, and especially in of the area that I'm in now. I've been in touch with Uncle Dennis Foley, who's a native of this area and is an elder. And some of the stories and some of the awareness that is there for Aboriginal people, not only just of this area, is just amazing. It's amazing for me as Māori, because, I mean, we won't go into it, but there is a Māori connection in New South Wales with the Aboriginal people. So, I'm really happy that it's something that you're consciously engaged in.
Well, you have to be. When you're working in this area, you've got to be involved in all of those things. And as I say, you get nutritionists specialised in diet, and you get exercise physiologists specialised in exercise. But if you're an epidemiologist, you have to specialise in all of them. You have to know the underlying basis of all of them, so that you can then work out, because all of these things interact. If you change if you've got somebody who's overweight or obese, and you change their diet, that's not going to help, because that's not just changing one thing. Their diet is influenced by their sleep patterns and their physical activity and their relationships with their family and their relationships with their culture. And all these things interact. We call it a systems model. It's not a linear model. You don't just change the diet and then that decreases weight and then you go off and you're better and better. All these things interact, and you can't just change one thing. You've got to change all of them.
It's interesting you say that. I mean, I know in I would say ancient, or I wouldn't probably say ancient because it's not. I mean, it's but in times gone past, in especially Māori culture, I know that the tohungas or the doctors who were involved in health and medicine, that was definitely the approach. It wasn't just go and eat these leaves mixed with this. It was everything else involved with it. Your involvement in the community, the moon cycles, what foods are being planted and when, how it's not just hacking at the leaves, so to speak. There's many.
Yeah, look,
many...
I've been out in the bush with Aboriginal men in particular. I've worked more with men, but I'm now working with Aboriginal women as well, down the south coast of New South Wales. And I've been out in the desert, out in Central Australia with these guys, and you walk through, and me as a white man, I've got relatively good perception. I can appreciate art, I can appreciate fine detail of things, but I walk through the bush and these guys see things that I don't see. They can see, a little bush orange or a little bush lemon or something there, a mulberry that's native Australian mulberries and gooseberries and things. And I don't see them, and they stop and they can pick these up and they can look at them and they can tell, what time of what season of the year this is, as a result of the way the plant looks. They can tell which animals eat it, where the seeds have been dropped. They have amazing perception, which we don't appreciate as a white culture.
I've said this many times before, and I'm sure you agree, had Australia adopted more of taking care of their Aboriginal people, for one, and actually learnt what they had to offer, Australia would be really untouchable in terms of its cultural awareness. And I think the technological advancements here especially would have been so much more far in advance than anywhere else in the world, I believe, simply because
this may still happen, of course, because we are driving ourselves to extinction anyway, and the Aboriginals will survive if that extinction does occur in white and other advanced Western societies. We call ourselves advanced. We call ourselves Western societies. Western's okay, but advanced, you have to question whether it's advanced from time to time.
Yes, yeah, probably more so than not. Yeah. So I know that you say that you are helping a lot of these communities, especially in Aboriginal. I mean, I know that it's not just Indigenous cultures that you're working with, but men on a whole. Where are you seeing the bigger uptakes in terms of what you're able to offer? I mean, are they taking to the fact that that there's a mindset that needs to be changed? So where are men specifically, where are they finding the value in what you're offering?
That's an interesting question. I started the men's program, the GutBuster program, back in 1992, I think it was.
91, I think, yeah, 91.
Yeah, and I did it because men weren't being looked after. Everything to do with weight control and obesity, which really only started in 1980. If you look at Australia and America and England and all that, the epidemic in obesity just started around about 1980, and there are good reasons for that. And I need more time to explain that. But what happened is the men weren't looked after. So in 1991, I said, well, okay, let's do something for men. So we set up the GutBusters program. They flocked to it over about 10 years. And one of the reasons they did flock to it was because they could be themselves. They could talk in groups without having to brag or without having to big note themselves in front of other men. And you'll find that men, when they're in a group of women, if you've got one man, they react totally differently than men in a group of men. Yeah. Personally, I hate being in groups of men because it's all bluster and it's not genuine, it's not real. And if you can get them out of that and discuss their real issues, you'll find that they have real health problems. They don't want to be fat. They don't want to have a beer gut. They don't want to be unhealthy. They don't want to have kidney problems. They don't want to be on dialysis. They don't want heart disease killing them, 20 years earlier than it should. And so you can do something with them then. And interestingly, when you get them to that level of motivation to have decided to want to do something, they are fantastic to work with. They are better than any other group that I've ever worked with, because they do what you tell them, what you advise them. If you advise them properly, and it's strict scientific advice, you don't give them conspiracy theories or nut-based programs or anything like that. If you give them good advice that they can carry out themselves, they will do it. And you don't have to do much, and you can just let them go. And I've still got men. This is GutBusters was bought out by Weight Watchers about 2002, and I still have men that I meet at airports that come up to me and say, "You used to run the GutBuster program. Look at me. I haven't got a gut anymore." And these are not just white men. These are Torres Strait Islanders and Aboriginal men, and Tongans and others that I've worked with. Fantastic. They're the best group to work with, and a lot of health people don't really appreciate that they are, and they neglect them. They think they're too hard to work with.
Oh yeah, I like, so the waist loss program. I think it was kind of termed.
That's right. Yeah, we didn't look at weight, and there were simple things like that, because when you take the weight of a man, it's not representative of body fat, because when you stand on a scale, what you're measuring is muscle, bone, and all those things that make a man big. When I was invited at one stage by the doctor at South Sydney Rugby League Club to look at all their players, this was back in the 80s, to look at their players, because when they measured them on a body mass index, which is weight over height squared, they were all regarded as obese. And he said, the doctor said, "I can't understand why they're obese. And these are the fittest men on the planet. Rugby league players, you don't get any fitter men." And so when you measure their body fat in contrast to their weight, they have very little body fat, up to 3% body fat, which is almost no fat at all. They're so lean and so muscular. So you've got to treat that differently and you've got to look at it as a separate issue than you do with women when you're dealing with weight with women in particular. Yeah,
most definitely.
And some of the health problems that come from that.
So as a part of Karma Men, and what I'm hoping to achieve is to be able to introduce men such as myself to people such as yourself, Garry, to be able to kind of like maybe even reach out to ask for help. And I'm encouraging it. I'm not afraid to ask for help if I need it, if I know I need it. But so I know that it's difficult for some men because they don't know how to go about asking for it. And that's a kind of a part of the problem here. And so I hope that having this platform, men can just kind of share, like you're saying, once you get together with men in the right setting.
I'm not a clinician. A clinician deals with one-to-one.
Yeah.
And even though I've given you some advice from time to time particularly on cholesterol, which is a genetic problem largely in your case and in my case, and what you can do to deal with that. I don't work like a doctor in a one-to-one situation.
No.
I work with populations. So I'm more interested in reducing the cholesterol of a whole group of people or a whole population of people than I am on the one-to-one. The doctors have got to do that. We have a little motto in lifestyle medicine: you educate, you motivate, and you instigate. Whereas in medicine, you medicate, you operate, and you palliate. They're two different things.
Yeah.
The one in lifestyle medicine you do when people are well. The doctor deals with people who are not well, who are ill. Two separate issues. And the first one dealing with people when they're well, you're better off dealing with 100 people and just changing every one of those slightly than dealing with one and having a dramatic impact.
Going for the masses.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. I know that you're short on time, Garry, but and I do thank you. But I'd like to just finish off on something that I kind of want. By the way, you're the first actual video podcast that I've started, because all the other ones failed in the past. We'll leave that for later. But I kind of wanted to ask you the question that, look, if you could sit with your past selves, from each decade, what would be some things that you would say to your 20, your 30, your 40-year-old? Because what I'm trying to do is to kind of like, offer help to, say, a 20-year-old who has whatever issues that he's having, to a 30-year-old, because they're quite different in terms of whether it be financial, self-awareness, or health. But I mean, if you could sit with your 20, 30, 40, 50-year-old self, what would some of the things that you would say to your earlier selves?
That's a really interesting question, because my life wasn't planned in the way it's turned out, although I have no complaints about that at all. In my 20s, I thought I was going to be a psychologist, and I actually trained as a psychologist. But I was always interested in health. That was a passion. And I guess what I would say to myself in my 20s is follow your passion. I would also say that you need to, if you can help other people in your passion, then you've got 90% of the game is solved. If you're just doing it for yourself, like if you're a stockbroker or somebody who's out to make money but doesn't do anything for anybody. I think James Packer's a good example, having a casino that does nothing for anybody except himself, basically, and a few other people. I find no meaning in that, no satisfaction in that. And life has to have meaning, as I pointed out with the Aboriginal people, the meaninglessness, alienation, and loss of culture and identity. I guess as I got older, I fell more into a pattern of doing things that I was able to do in the health area. And I was working in health promotion, where I was delivering messages because of the psychology background. I was able to phrase messages on the media in particular and do advertisements. We did a lot on quit smoking, for example, the sponge ad. It's probably too long ago for many of your viewers to recognise, but where you wring out a sponge and you get the tar that goes into the lungs, that sort of stuff. And then from there, I moved more into epidemiology, which I was trained in public health, to take a particular problem at a particular time and work out how you can deal with that problem and what you can do to try and improve that problem. And you've got to, when you do this, you not only look at the cause of the problem, but to be successful, you've got to look at the cause of the cause and the cause of the cause of the cause. So you go right back into the environment and society. So that's why I pointed out right from the start, when you're looking at even an infectious disease like COVID, you have to take account of the environment in which COVID arises and in which pandemics arise. And as a result of the environmental destruction that we're carrying out in the world at the moment, purely for money reasons mainly, and for economic reasons, then you have to say, well, when's this going to stop? Because if it doesn't stop, the pandemics are going to get shorter, and so the distance between them is going to get smaller. The last major one we had was in 1918, of course, the world pandemic, but we've had little ones after that. And people don't realise that HIV and Zika virus and these other problems are cropping up in increasingly shorter periods. And this one's a big one. And the one after this, after a couple of smaller ones, will probably be even bigger than this if we don't do something about our environment and the cause of the cause of the cause.
So you're moving forward as being at the front of trying to help people understand the causes and how we're going to try to alleviate. And
being at the front of things is not always comfortable.
No.
You cop a lot of flack.
Well,
because you've got vested interests against you. For example, the economists that I'm railing against quite often, because I believe that, and I've got a degree in economics as well, so I believe that the system that we live under, which is the economic growth system, encourages people to just want to make money and not have meaning in their lives necessarily. And in doing that, the economists say, well, the more people we have, the easier it is to grow the economy and therefore to make money. And of course, we've got 8 billion people in the world now. We'll have 10 billion by 2050. And imagine those forests that we're clearing by then. They'll all be gone.
Yeah.
If we're not careful.
Well, what's the use, right? What's the use if those things aren't there?
And most people won't think of this, but it comes back to the cause of the cause of the cause, which is population and economics. And until we get our politicians to appreciate this and to look at changing the system and our way of thinking, then we're still going to be faced with these diseases that nobody, including me, are going to have 100% success with.
Right. Garry, I appreciate your time, and there's a lot of gold nuggets that have come out in this conversation. And I once again, thank you for joining us on podcast today.
Okay, I hope you could pull that all together, cut out my ums and ahs and my stuff.
Yeah, that's fine, I'm sure. Thanks.